In a newspaper article, in a local daily, something rather strange was said somewhere deep in an article talking about President Ruto's latest warning to the Gen Zs about the ongoing protests. This is what the article said. The president sounded frustrated. That is a rather strange statement when you're talking about the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, the head of state of the country called Kenya. Is there any truth in it? Well, let us analyze that, and let us start with the rather chilling words of Ruto. And I quote, "I want to promise you that there will be no more protests. They are going to stop. Enough is enough." The message was very clear. He talked about crushing the tyranny of anonymous, faceless, formless, sponsored Gen Zs. Now, one of the reasons why this speech by Ruto was extra chilling is because of what has already happened so far. What has already been done to peaceful protesters in the country called Kenya. And therefore, one must ask the question, what more terrible thing can happen to the Gen Zs fighting for their rights and indeed fighting for their future? Because the future does not belong to the generation of Ruto, and neither does it belong to my generation. Sisi tumemaliza na wengine tunamalizia. The future belongs to the Gen Zs and the younger generations. Unarmed protesters wamepigwa risasi kwa kichwa. Many Kenyans have been abducted and remain missing. Many other peaceful protesters have been arrested, and some of the charges preferred against them are, shall I say, interesting and painful because they are far from the truth. Indeed, the brutality of the Ruto regime has reached new heights in the country called Kenya. We did not even see this during the very brutal dictatorial years of number 2, the second president of Kenya, the late Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. We never reached where we have reached today when you're talking about the response of the government to peaceful demonstrators. It was terrible, but we have never reached where we have reached today. Some peaceful protesters wamekula risasi 12, 8, 6, 3, and one wonders, isn't one bullet more than enough? Isn't one bullet one too much? And therefore, in this kind of scenario, when President Ruto talks the way he talked yesterday, it is more than chilling. Because now one has to start using the imagination to imagine what worst thing can happen to peaceful protesters exercising their constitutional rights. What is this worst thing that can happen to them? And we have not even started talking about the Kware Manenos. I'm sure you know what I mean. The very gory findings at the bottom of that quarry, at the Mukuru kwa Njega slums in Nairobi, at that place called Kware. And Kenyans have seen the games being played there. A suspect was gotten in record time and accused of being responsible for the findings at Kware. And so, What worse things can happen to the Gen Z protesters, and of course many other Kenyans right across the board, who have very enthusiastically joined them in the protests? Because we have been told by Ruto that he's going to crush the tyranny of anonymous, faceless, formless, sponsored people. And in his own words, and I quote, "I want to promise you that there will be no more protests. They are going to stop. Enough is enough." And I'm sure by now you have noticed the elephant in the room, which is our 2010 Constitution. Now, in my opinion, the crafters of our Constitution put quite a number of booby traps. I'm sure you know what booby traps are. Traps that you don't expect. Traps that you don't see until it is too late. And one of them was to enshrine very deeply in this Constitution the right to picket, the right to protest peacefully, without any arms. It is super fascinating and indeed amusing how the government has tried to do so much acrobatics to change the interpretation of what the Constitution actually says. Or it is unconstitutional to disrupt, or this is not constitutional because the Constitution says you should not interfere with the right of others, etc., etc. And despite all the acrobatics, nothing has managed to take off and fly, because protests and picketing, by their very nature, will obviously disrupt. That is the whole point, isn't it? Because when you march down the streets, singing, yelling, shouting, carrying placards, isn't that disruption? And the Constitution says very clearly that is allowed. It is allowed. You cannot stop it. And I actually agree with what was written in that newspaper article. Very controversial, may sound strange, but I believe it is true that President Ruto is very frustrated. And one of the reasons why somebody can get very frustrated is when you fail to see the new reality. You're used to something, things qua ground they change, and then you try and do what you've always been doing, and it is not working. Will you not get very frustrated? Because the truth is, the country called Kenya, for better or for worse, has changed forever. And you cannot unchange it. Nobody can unchange it. And Ruto and those who advise him have completely failed to see it. Or they have deliberately refused to see it. And now I'm going to shock you to your bones. At least the majority of you. Because there are some who look at things very deeply, and they have already seen what should be obvious. Because a very casual study of regimes the world over that have fallen will immediately tell you is that one of the things that happen when the end is very near is that the regime threatens the people, the voters. Former Sudanese strongman, military dictator al-Bashir threatened the youngsters who toppled him just shortly before he went home. Oops, he didn't actually go home. He went to jail. He's still there as we speak. And this is the stage where the regime goes through something called denial. Let me illustrate that in a way that we can all be sure A patient, very unfortunately, is approaching stage 4 and the last stage of a fatal incurable disease, something like cancer or even HIV/AIDS. And that patient, like in a vast majority of the cases, is in denial. And so one day, they attempt to stand up, to walk to the washroom. Their legs can't take their weight. Allah, what's happening? And somebody who understands and is very kind comes one day to see them with diapers, and they get very angry. What are those diapers for? What are you doing? You're not my real friend. And they throw the very expensive adult diapers into the trash can. And then shortly after that, they discover that they can no longer control. They no longer have control over their call of nature. And the smell and the mess causes them to scramble to that trash can to look for the diapers that some kind person had donated to them. Denial. That is the stage the Ruto regime is going through, because they are behaving like things are still the same old, same old. Nothing has changed in Kenya. That is how they're behaving. And that is how the president was behaving in telling the nation, I want to promise you there'll be no more protests. They are going to stop. Enough is enough. Now, those of us with the memory of an elephant will remember that there was a time during Raila Odinga and Azimio's maandamanos in 2023, the government issued a very similar threat to the protesters. Now, I want you to try and remember, did that stop the maandamanos? Did it? Actually, no. What stopped the maandamanos was Raila Odinga and Azimio themselves, who told us at the time that they were stopping the maandamanos for dialogue, which led to the infamous NADCO talks, National Dialogue something. The results of that, because the number one demand, bringing down the cost of living, has never, ever been addressed up to this very minute, because taxes continue to increase. Finance Bill 2024 is being implemented mdogo mdogo, chini ya maji. Kenyans have already seen price increases. Even after Finance Bill 2024 was trashed, Kenyans have already seen price increases via taxes proposed in Finance Bill 2024. Smokers, those who smoke cigarettes, will confirm on the spot what I'm talking about. In my humble opinion, and I could be wrong, the Ruto regime is just entering stage 4 of a lethal, incurable disease. That the Gen Zs are very determined to deal with. And therefore the symptoms that we're witnessing are very normal. And of course, top on the list is denial. Acting like nothing has changed when everything has changed. We are now moving towards the final days of this season of gifting yours truly, Chris Kumekucha. You can see details on your screens right now. Those details are repeated in the description area below this video on YouTube and also in the comments area. I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for your support in what I do, towards this cause that we are all fighting for, a better Kenya, fulfilling what I believe is my purpose. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.